Greetings to everyone, friends. Today there has been a lot of news about how the world is starting to take some measures to fix the situation with the shortage of oil and gas in the world, so that prices specifically for us as end consumers don't skyrocket. But unfortunately, personally in my opinion, and I'll explain why, everything that's being done right now will only have a short-term effect. And if the war in Iran drags on, if Iran doesn't unblock the Persian Gulf, then each of us will keep getting poorer and poorer. Week after week, more and more, until this situation ends, and then for a very long period after that. After that, for example, an alternative for Europe could be buying Russian oil and gas. But we understand that this would be direct funding. It would be direct funding for Ukraine, yes, and the war in Ukraine. In that case, there will be no end to it at all, and there will be no levers of influence on Russia. Its economy will simply gain strength, while the Ukrainian economy will continue to suffer. And, in fact, watch the video until the end to understand what will happen. Maybe draw some specific conclusions for your life plans, make some preparations, and be critical of those strong statements that are being made. So, support the video with a like, comment, and subscription. As always, thank you to each of you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Dennis, and I share news for Ukrainians abroad. So first of all, there have been a lot of reports that the world is starting to release strategic oil reserves. In order to lower the price of this oil and somehow cover the existing shortages. But in my opinion, as they say, it's like putting a band-aid on a broken leg just for the time being. And now I'll also explain why. In the last 24 hours, there have been at least 3 reports about the release of strategic oil reserves. The Wall Street Journal reports that the International Energy Agency may release a record amount of oil from strategic reserves to stabilize prices. We're talking about 400 million barrels, which is twice as much as the 182 million barrels that were released at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So, 400 million. Remember this number. Actually, the proposal was made at an emergency meeting of 32 countries members of this organization, and they have to make a final decision, which in fact has already been made. So are oil prices specifically affected right now? Next, the United States of America is also releasing 172 million barrels from its strategic reserves to lower oil prices. The second story, yes, another 172 million. And there was also a message from Turkey that they are also releasing around 11 million barrels from their strategic reserves, 11.6 to be exact. This was announced by the Turkish Minister of Energy, Bayraktar. Interesting, right? But yes, that company actually belongs to him, or rather to the Bayraktar family. Next, remember these numbers, 400 plus 172 plus about 11 more or less, 600 million barrels of oil are being released. And everyone thinks, wow, that's it. Everything has stabilized, everything will be fine, oil prices will be stable. But no, because if we look at the statistics before this conflict, meaning what was happening 2 weeks ago through the Hormuz Strait, which is now being blocked by Iran, and in fact, the wallet of every European, every Ukrainian, basically everyone in the world depends on it. Just in one day, 20 million barrels of oil passed through it. That's 600 million barrels. A reserve, in fact, for 30 days, just to compensate for the closed strait for only 30 days. What will happen next? Next, prices will rise again if the conflict continues. And as of today, we see that it's not even like that anymore. It depends on whether the United States of America wants to leave this war and go home. And it also depends on whether Iran will be satisfied with what is happening. Because now they want not just for the United States to leave, but for the United States of America to provide them with ironclad security guarantees about the absence of repeated attacks in the future. They want access to all of their nuclear, let's say, capabilities, and they want to be able to continue doing what they are doing. And they are also demanding reparations from the United States of America for the damage caused. And in fact, even if the war ends today, it's not at all certain that the Strait of Hormuz will be open tomorrow, because let me remind you, Iran has already started mining it. And until Iran personally declares, or until there is a complete capitulation of Iran, or until Iran says that they are satisfied with everything and are opening the way for the first oil to the world. Until that happens, the situation will continue. And we understand that Trump and the United States are not going to give up their positions and end this war today. And even if they are not going to pay reparations or apologize to Iran and fulfill all their conditions. So this will mean that the Strait will remain closed, and Iran has also officially responded to its statements regarding the war. Cessation of attacks in the Hormuz Strait. Officials from Turkey, Egypt, India, and Pakistan have appealed to Iran to stop the attacks in the Hormuz Strait. In response, Tehran made a very interesting statement. They said, either everyone will have security or no one will. In other words, they are not going to give the world access to oil as long as strikes continue on their territory, the war goes on, their infrastructure is being destroyed, and everything else. So basically, Iran has taken the Strait of Hormuz hostage, and by doing so has taken the entire world economy hostage. Because I want to remind you that the ones most dependent on this oil are, first of all, the countries of Asia, and secondly, Europe. In Europe, at least, there is another option. Oil supplies, for example, from Russia, which is basically what Asian countries are also doing. But even if Russia started selling this oil to everyone right now, there simply wouldn't be enough of it. Because about 20% of the world's oil volumes pass through the Strait of Hormuz. 20% is a lot for the global economy. Who doesn't understand this? Next, Reuters reports that the world is facing the biggest oil supply disruption in history. The International Energy Agency reported that the war in the Middle East has triggered the biggest oil supply disruption in the entire history of the global market. The Persian Gulf countries have reduced their total oil production by at least 10 million barrels per day, which is equivalent to almost 10% of global demand. Without a quick restoration of shipping, these losses will only increase, and it will take weeks or in some cases even months to return production to pre-crisis levels. And we understand that this is even without taking into account that Iran may continue to bomb, and it may directly make bombing oil and gas facilities its main targets, which will only intensify and deepen this crisis. And for some reason, it seems to me that the longer the war goes on, the fewer capabilities Iran has, the more they will strike, specifically targeting the oil and gas infrastructure, in order to plunge the world into chaos. And we see that, unfortunately, as of today, they are doing this very, very well. So we see that the strategic reserves that are being allocated now will actually be enough to stabilize the situation for about a month, more or less. But again, those who trade oil understand what's next and what will happen next, and there could be an abyss ahead. They might release another part of the strategic reserves, but there aren't as many as everyone thinks. And the volumes being released now are already huge. And now the only hope is that the war in Iran will end and the Strait of Hormuz will be unblocked. That's the situation. Also, there's another very interesting piece of information. Reuters reports that the United States Navy is rejecting daily requests for military escort of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping companies insist on protection for their tankers when passing through the Strait of Hormuz. However, the United States Navy has told them that they cannot provide an escort at this time due to the high risk of Iranian attacks. This position contrasts with a previous statement by Trump, who said that the United States was ready to escort ships if necessary to help restore oil supplies through the strait. But we see that, unfortunately, Donald Trump's words do not always match reality. Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has effectively stopped since the start of the war in the Middle East, which has disrupted global oil exports and pushed energy prices up. Reuters also reports that already this morning, there were statements that Iran attacked 3 ships that tried to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Among them is a Thai tanker. 1 Thai tanker. It is known that 3 crew members are missing, and the rest of the crew was evacuated with the boat. So we see that tankers are trying to pass, but they are attacked immediately, at the very same moment. Because Iran said at the very beginning of this war that as long as Iran is in danger, not a single drop, not a single liter of Persian oil will leave through the Strait of Hormuz. No one is going anywhere. As long as what's happening in Iran continues, the whole world will suffer. That's just how it is. Because let me remind you, rising oil prices mean, first of all, restrictions that affect absolutely everyone. And secondly, it means higher prices for absolutely all products. And the shortage itself can simply provoke a collapse in production when it will be necessary to cut back on production, and cutting back on production means job losses. Next, here's another interesting piece of news from Denmark, because there are already the first consequences, specific ones, specifically for us. CNBC reports that the Danish Minister of Energy has urged people to reduce fuel consumption amid the oil crisis caused by the war in Iran, saying, please, if you don't need to go anywhere, then don't do it. So we see that just driving around the city for fun is becoming, first of all, very expensive, and secondly, it harms the European economy. That's the story. Who could have thought? How do you assess this situation in general? What do you think will happen to Europe if the war continues for a month, 2, 3, half a year? Because there was already information that the fighting could last until the end of September or until September. Yes, that's what was reported. If I'm not mistaken, American intelligence said until September. Imagine what could happen to the world economy after another half a year of war, if there are already such crazy consequences in less than 2 weeks. Imagine if this goes on for another half a year. That's actually 12 times as long as it has been so far. There will be a collapse. All I can say is there will be a collapse in Asia, in Europe, and basically in the world. And Russia? And this will definitely force Europe to buy oil from Russia, and then Russia will be able to use it even more as its weapon. Because they will be able to sell this oil if there is such a shortage, because they will be able to sell it at inflated prices, and then they will even be able to choose who they want to sell this oil to and who they don't. That's our situation today, friends. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm interested to read them. Thanks. See you next time.